Georg Simmel, why nobody on a crowded street actually looks at you. Why does a lifelong city dweller walk straight past a street performer without breaking stride, while a visitor from a small town stops, stares, maybe even applauds? Same performer, same sidewalk, completely different reaction.
That gap is basically the entire career of Georg Simmel, a thinker who noticed the modern city was doing something genuinely new to the human nervous system and decided to actually study it.
Simmel, born in Berlin in 1858, the same year as Durkheim, working many of the same questions, and somehow far less famous today. Why does he tend to get overshadowed?
Partly bad academic luck, honestly. Simmel wrote brilliant, wide-ranging essays rather than the kind of single systematic masterwork that tends to anchor a thinker's reputation for later generations. And he faced real antisemitism within the German academic establishment of his time, which slowed his formal career advancement despite his obvious talent and influence on students who went on to become major figures themselves, including a young Georg Lukács, and more consequentially for later sociology. A considerable influence on Max Weber. He deserves to stand right alongside Durkheim, not slightly behind him.
Let us start with the idea you opened on, the blasé attitude.
In his essay The Metropolis and Mental Life, published in 1903, Simmel argued that city dwellers develop what he called a blasé attitude, a kind of emotional numbness or indifference toward the sheer volume of stimulation constant urban life throws at a person. In a small town, encountering a stranger, a striking building, an unusual event, is genuinely rare and therefore genuinely significant, worth a real emotional reaction. In a large city, a person might pass hundreds of strangers, dozens of unusual sights, in a single walk to work. Simmel argued the mind protects itself by dialing down its emotional response to almost all of it, not because city dwellers feel less deeply as people, but because reacting fully to everything would be completely overwhelming.
Which explains the street performer perfectly.
Exactly the mechanism. The city dweller has developed a kind of practical emotional filter, unconsciously screening out the constant, low-level stimulation of urban life to preserve enough attention and energy for what actually matters that day: a client meeting, a family emergency, an actual close relationship. The visitor from a small town has no such filter built up, so a street performer registers as a genuinely notable event rather than background noise.
Simmel also has this striking idea about the stranger as a specific social role, not just a passing description.
Simmel's essay on the stranger describes a genuinely interesting social position, someone who is close enough to a group to interact regularly and meaningfully with it, but remains permanently outside its deepest bonds, not fully absorbed into its history and assumptions. He argued that position, uncomfortable as it can feel personally, actually grants a kind of clarity. The stranger often sees a group's own unspoken norms and assumptions more clearly than lifelong insiders can, precisely because those norms were never simply absorbed as invisible background from childhood. It is a strikingly generous, almost hopeful reading of what could otherwise be treated purely as social exclusion.
And then there is his work on money itself, which is one of his most genuinely original contributions.
In The Philosophy of Money, Simmel argued that money is not simply a neutral tool for exchanging goods, it is itself a social relation, one that fundamentally reshapes how people relate to each other and to objects. Before a widespread money economy, value and obligation were tightly bound up with specific personal relationships, a favor owed to a particular neighbor, a debt tied to a specific family. Money, Simmel argued, lets value become abstract and impersonal, fully interchangeable, which brings real freedom. You are no longer bound to specific people to get what you need, but also a kind of social thinning, relationships mediated by an impersonal medium rather than direct mutual obligation.
He also wrote about fashion, which sounds like a lighter topic but fits the same underlying logic.
It fits perfectly, and Simmel treats it with real seriousness rather than as a frivolous side note. He argued fashion works through a constant tension between imitation and distinction, people adopting a trend to feel connected to a group, and simultaneously abandoning it once it becomes too widespread. chasing new distinction once the old marker of status becomes too common to signal anything special anymore. That endless cycle, adoption followed by abandonment followed by a new trend, was for Simmel a small, visible model of a much larger dynamic running through all of modern social life: the constant push and pull between belonging to a group and standing out from it.
Let us root this in the actual historical moment he was watching, because Berlin at the turn of the century was changing at an extraordinary pace.
Berlin's population roughly doubled within just a few decades around the turn of the 20th century, transforming from a relatively modest Prussian capital into one of Europe's largest, most frantically modernizing metropolises: electric streetlights, department stores, mass transit, and a genuinely new pace of daily life all arriving within Simmel's own adult lifetime. He was not writing abstract theory from a comfortable historical distance. He was walking through the actual laboratory of modern urban life as it was being built in real time around him, and taking careful notes on what it was doing to the people living through it.
Is there real pushback on Simmel worth including, the way there has been for everyone else in this series?
There is, and it is worth taking seriously. Some later sociologists have argued Simmel's blasé attitude concept, while brilliantly observed, is more of a suggestive literary insight than a rigorously tested sociological claim, built more on sharp personal observation of Berlin street life than on the kind of systematic evidence Durkheim insisted sociology needed to earn its scientific standing. Others have pointed out his account of urban indifference can undersell how much genuine, deep community and mutual support persists inside cities, in tight ethnic neighborhoods, religious congregations, and close friend groups, alongside the anonymous crowd he focused on. Cities, in other words, produce both his blasé stranger and Durkheim's tightly bonded community, often within a few blocks of each other.
That is a fair complication. Now bring this fully into the present, because social media seems like an almost perfect modern laboratory for Simmel's ideas.
Almost eerily perfect. Social media exposes people to a volume and pace of strangers, images, and events that would have seemed unimaginable even to Simmel writing about the crowded streets of Berlin. Thousands of posts, faces, and micro-events scrolling past in a single sitting. Researchers studying digital behavior increasingly describe something very close to Simmel's blasé attitude playing out online: a kind of scroll numbness, where individual posts, even genuinely significant news, blur together into an undifferentiated stream that struggles to produce any lasting emotional reaction at all. His fashion cycle theory maps almost too neatly onto social media trends too: a meme, a style, or a slang term spreading rapidly through imitation, then getting abandoned the moment it becomes too widespread to signal anything distinctive anymore, compressed from years down to weeks.
Which connects directly to today's loneliness and urban anonymity debates, following naturally from where we left Durkheim.
Directly, and in an interesting tension with Durkheim's own framework. Durkheim worried primarily about weakening social integration, people losing the stable communal structures that once gave life clear shared meaning. Simmel's angle is subtly different. He is more interested in how a person can be constantly surrounded by other people, more than at any point in human history, and still feel genuinely disconnected from almost all of them: a specifically urban, specifically crowded form of loneliness, rather than simple isolation. Current debates about digital life and urban anonymity draw on both threads simultaneously, sometimes without fully distinguishing which specific mechanism, weak norms, or emotional overload, is actually doing the damage in any given case.
So what is the honest, motivating reason to know Simmel's name alongside Durkheim's, rather than letting him stay in the shadow?
Because he noticed something Durkheim's broader statistical approach could genuinely miss: that modern life does not only threaten connection by weakening shared norms across a whole society, it can also overwhelm the nervous system directly, simply through sheer, relentless stimulation, teaching people to numb themselves as a genuine survival strategy. Understanding your own blasé moments: the stranger you walked past without a glance, the notification you scrolled past without truly registering, is understanding Simmel's whole argument from the inside.
Which sets up a natural next step for this module, because our next thinker took both of these threads, Durkheim's concern about weakening social bonds and Simmel's fascination with the texture of modern life, and turned rationalization itself into the defining drama of the entire modern age.
Where Simmel studied the individual nervous system adapting to urban overload, our next thinker studied something even larger: how entire societies get reorganized around cold, efficient, rule-bound systems, and what gets quietly lost in that trade.
Next time, Max Weber, and the iron cage he warned modern life was slowly building around all of us. See you then.